On the last Friday of term, the head office of Riverbend High felt different. Posters of excellent exam results covered the walls, and the principal walked around with the satisfied air of someone whose school's reputation had just risen another step. Mira, however, stood outside the door, clutching a thin envelope. She was not the top student. There were others more obviously brilliant, more loudly outstanding, and the school often invited them to show off the prestige prizes they had won. Still, Mira had something else. For years, she had been quietly diligent, doing the slow, painstaking work of rewriting essays and resolving math questions until her skill grew sharp. Her headmaster liked to say that Mira's approach to study was simple: ask why, then ask what if. Today, the envelope in her hand carried the Golden Crest of Northbridge University, an eminent institution whose faculty included some of the most respected names in the country, and one rather notorious scientist whose risky projects had recently shaken the news. The Dean of Admissions had already called the school to certify that yes, this was real. Mira had been chosen as a full scholarship candidate for a bachelor degree in data science. If she managed to qualify in the final round, the scholarship would cover her fees, her city travel permit, and even basic accommodation. The professor who would become her future mentor had written a short comment at the bottom of the letter: "We look for quiet scholars who respect questions more than answers. Your work shows that spirit." Mira read that line 3 times, feeling a strange mix of pride and disbelief rising like warm air in her chest. 2 months later, Mira stood in front of Northbridge's stone arch, watching other new students, freshers as everyone called them, pull heavy suitcases across the campus. Banners welcomed them to the matriculation ceremony, where they would officially enroll and register as members of this old co-ed university. Upper year students, sophomore, junior, and senior alike, handed out maps and shouted directions toward the hall where orientation activities were already starting. Inside the Great Hall, the dean spoke again about the school's history and prestige. Around Mira, flags from many countries hung from the ceiling. The university liked to call itself an academic platform for global citizens. Some graduates had become international diplomats and even cultural ambassadors. Their photos stared down from the balcony, rows of smiling alumni frozen in time. When the speeches ended, an older student led Mira to the residence office. She received a key to her dorm, a narrow bed, and a desk with a view of the library tower. It felt small, but to Mira it was a kingdom. That evening she ate her first meal in the dining hall, sharing a table with strangers who would soon become friends. The smell of spices drifted from the canteen kitchens, and the whole campus hummed with voices, suitcase wheels, and the nervous laughter of people trying to pretend they were not nervous at all. Mira carried her official diploma from high school in her backpack. It was more than a piece of paper. It was proof that she deserved to be here, at least on paper. Convincing herself was harder. Classes began with a blur of welcome emails and online forms. Mira had to register for modules, log into the learning platform, and choose between different lecturers whose names she did not yet recognize. Her assigned mentor, Professor Alden, was a calm woman with silver hair tied in a low knot. During their first meeting, she spoke softly. "Here, we care less about how outstanding you were in school," she said, "and more about how you approach problems now. You are not just a pupil anymore. You are training to be a scholar." For her programming course, Mira was also given a tutor, a patient assistant named Leo, a former graduate now finishing his master's thesis. Each week, Leo ran small group sessions to help students who were lost between lectures and homework. "Think of this degree as a long experiment," he told them one afternoon. "The university will not certify you as a graduate just because you survived. You have to show real growth in both the quality and quantity of your work." Mira listened carefully. She knew that, at the end of 4 years, she hoped to graduate with more than a bachelor's degree. She wanted to carry a sense of inner esteem. Not pride built only on grades, but a deep respect for the person she had become. Outside the classroom, older alumni visited to talk about careers. One had obtained a professional license to handle sensitive government data. Another had used her diploma to work as a laboratory manager overseas. Their stories stretched Mira's sense of what might be possible after university, like windows opening in a dark hallway. Halfway through the first term, a rumor raced through the campus. The famous and infamous Professor Halden was recruiting first-year students for a new experiment. Halden was the notorious scientist from the news, praised by some as brilliant and criticized by others for a risky scheme that had nearly lost the university its research reputation. The ethics board had eventually allowed him to continue under strict rules. Now he wanted fresh eyes. Mira found herself reading the call for applications again and again. The project was about predicting floods using real-time environmental data, combining sensors, satellites, and community reports. The work sounded meaningful. If successful, it could help protect vulnerable villages. But there were warnings everywhere. Older students whispered that Halden's working style was harsh, his standards unforgiving. Still, Professor Alden encouraged Mira to try. "Real learning doesn't always feel comfortable," Alden said. "Go and listen. You can always say no." At the interview, Halden scanned Mira's file with a frown. "Your grades are excellent," he said, "but I am not interested only in scores. Describe a time you failed and what you changed in your approach." Mira spoke about a high school robotics contest where her machine collapsed in front of everyone. She told him how shame had driven her to review every small decision, charting the quantity and quality of errors until she understood the deeper pattern. Halden watched her quietly. Finally, he nodded once. "You may join," he said. "You will be part of the field team. It will be painstaking work. If you prefer a comfortable scheme, walk away now." She did not walk away. The next months became a rhythm of boots and books. On some days, Mira sat in the library until closing time, surrounded by silent rows of students. She learned that true prestige did not come from a fancy building. It grew from the quiet heat of thousands of minds thinking at once. On other days, she traveled with the project team to rivers and coastal towns, installing sensors that would send back data about water levels and rainfall. Each sensor had to be placed with careful skill. One wrong angle and weeks of numbers would be useless. Back in the laboratory, Mira and the other students cleaned mud from their boots while checking graphs on flickering screens. They sorted the incoming information, testing its quality and quantity, before feeding it into the prediction models. Leo, her tutor, sometimes dropped by after hours. "This is the kind of work that will really qualify you for future roles," he said. "It shows you can handle messy reality, not just clean textbook problems." Mira felt both exhausted and alive. She still attended lectures, submitted essays, and joined her friends in the dining hall, where conversations bounced from memes to politics. Yet the project began to shape her sense of identity more than any exam result. One rainy night, while entering yet another batch of sensor readings, she realized something. The girl who once doubted she belonged here was gone. In her place stood someone who could stand in a storm with a clipboard, knowing exactly which numbers mattered and why. The real test arrived earlier than anyone expected. That year, the rainy season turned unpredictable. Storms changed direction without warning, and rivers rose faster than the models predicted. One evening, a small town 2 hours from campus reported flooding in areas that should have been safe according to the system. The university's emergency committee gathered in a stark meeting room. Screens showed maps covered in red and blue lines. Professor Halden's reputation trembled in the air like an unspoken word. "We are receiving conflicting data," one assistant said. "The quantity is high, but the quality is uneven. Some sensors might be damaged." The regional government, listening through a video call, reminded them that flood warnings required official reports from licensed analysts. Only experts with a specific license could issue them, and delays could cost lives. Halden pushed his chair back. "Rules cannot stop the river," he muttered. Mira remembered the first time she had traced her old robot's failure, following small mistakes back to a core misunderstanding. Slowly, an idea formed in her mind, a different approach to reading the messy numbers. She hesitated. Who was she? A first-year fresher, to speak in a room full of senior faculty and government diplomats. Yet she also felt a new kind of inner esteem, built not on ego but on hard, diligent work. "Professor," she said quietly, "may I show something?" The room turned toward her. Mira stepped to the front, hands only slightly shaking. On the screen, she pulled up the sensor data and layered it with information from local phones and satellite images, sources usually dismissed as too noisy for official reports. "Our formal system waits until every input is certified-level clean," she explained. "But in a fast emergency, waiting for perfect quality can be dangerous. I suggest we treat each partially damaged sensor as a vote and combine those votes with citizen reports. The quantity of overlapping hints might be more reliable than a few perfect numbers." A government ambassador to the university frowned. "That sounds like a risky scheme for someone of your level." Professor Alden, who had slipped into the room, spoke up. "Her approach is similar to methods used by health agencies. Many rough signals, if handled carefully, can form one strong message." Halden stared at the maps. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then his famous impatience returned, but this time it burned in a useful direction. "Fine," he said. "We test her method on tonight's storm. If the prediction matches the field reports, we issue an early warning. I will take responsibility." Mira and a small team worked through the night, rerunning calculations again and again. When the results finally stabilized, they showed a clear pattern. The river would breach a second, unexpected barrier within hours. The warning went out. Local authorities evacuated the area just in time. The next morning, news images showed flooded streets, but also long lines of people alive and dry on higher ground. In the weeks that followed, the story spread. Some headlines praised the brilliant fresher who saved a town. Others focused on the university's earlier mistakes, calling the project reckless and notorious. Inside Northbridge, however, something quieter changed. At a special ceremony, the dean publicly thanked not only Professor Halden, but the entire student team, emphasizing their collective diligent effort rather than any single hero. Mira received a modest award and a letter stating that her work would count toward future graduate studies if she ever chose to pursue a master's degree. The ethics board updated their guidelines, using her method as an example of how to balance quality and quantity of evidence in crisis situations. One evening, as the sun slid behind the campus roofs, Mira and Leo sat on the steps outside the library. "Do you feel different now?" he asked. "A little," she admitted, "but not in the way people expect. I don't feel like a genius, I just feel responsible." "That," Leo said, "is exactly what society hopes a university will qualify people for, not just jobs, but responsibility." Years later, Mira would graduate, join a research institute, and become part of a global network of alumni working on climate resilience. She would mentor new students, sit in laboratories and meeting rooms, and sometimes visit her old campus, walking past the dorm, the dining hall, and the canteen, where she had once studied between shifts. When asked about her time at Northbridge, she rarely mentioned the rescue itself. Instead, she spoke about the night she almost stayed silent, and then chose to raise her hand. Because that was the moment she truly moved from pupil to scholar, from being impressed by the university's prestige to understanding the deeper meaning of education, using knowledge, with respect and esteem for others, to protect real human lives. And that, she believed, was the kind of story worth telling, again and again in every orientation talk, every platform speech, and perhaps in someone's late-night library recording, turned into an experiment of sound and silence for anyone who needed to hear it.